Hello there and welcome to episode 64 of Right Where You're Sitting Now. Joining me in the co-pilot seat is one Mark Satir. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Excellent. Diabolically good, actually.
Diabolically good, yeah. Well, that's on topic, on trend, as they say. We've finally started to get some more entrants for our competition. I'm making it's become an obsession that people don't want a free copy of this book, but you know, if you're a regular listener, you know where to find the competition. So go try and grab yourself a free copy of Tobias Churton's latest book. But moving away from that subject. One thing I always forget, again, to mention in the beginning of the episode. I always mention it at the end, but not at the beginning. But do please come and engage with us on social media. Instagram, it's Sitting Now. YouTube, where we're going to be, we'll start uploading more video-centric content soon. Also Sitting Now. And Facebook, we have a page. I still don't understand how it works, so maybe not Facebook at the moment. I'm going to try and get that fixed. I need to learn what it actually does. I understand Facebook, but I need to understand how the page works. But and then Twitter, Sitting Now as well. So we're fairly easy to find. Just look for the triangle with the eye. Anyway, this week we have a guest who we've had on in video form, a bit like Peter Gray. When we first had Peter Gray on, we've had him on in video form. But it's someone I've wanted to have on. Actually, I've been looking for a good excuse to have him on for a while. And he's a very personable chap, so I'm really looking forward to the interview. Could you talk to us about what we're talking about today?
Well, Sitting Now, as we've forgathered ourselves at a ruined chapel. And we're being lit by a gibbous moon, waiting for the conclave of the abolitists before we open the gates of hell. Open the gates of hell wide, in fact, because we're going to open those for Carl Abrahamsson, and on the back of his excellent book, actually, his excellent book on the character of Anton Lavey, founder and head of the Church of Satan, founded in 1966, which is a long time ago now, and we will be exploring that. And if you can stand the heady mix of frankincense and sulphur in the air, we invite you also to this our dark meeting.
Oh, there we go. Let's throw open the doors and interview Carl Abrahamsson. Welcome to the show, Carl Abrahamsson. It's great to have you on. Could you give us a brief biography of yourself, please?
Yes, and let's keep it brief. It's always one of those hard questions, like when people ask you, which is your favorite movie? I have to think for a long time. It's not the same with the biography, of course, because I do remember where I come from. So basically, I was born and raised and still live in Sweden, and I come from a fairly cultured background. So I grew up with a lot of art and books and an interest in human communication, basically. And that, of course, created an imprint that still affects me today. And I think when you come to teenage years, you try to rebel a little bit and you become like a rubber band. You sort of go out in one direction, but then the band gets tense and you're pulled back somehow. So I think today that I'm in a position where I carry on in some kind of, family tradition in a way, and that I work with art and I work with publishing and culture in general. But it has also been very clearly marked by my own specific interests in, I guess we could call it, things having to do with the mind. That could be, religion, philosophy, occultism, of course, but also psychedelics in a way. Just things having to do with potential expansion of consciousness and how that can be integrated in a so-called normal life or a normal lifestyle. That's the very, basic overview. But then, of course, I think people know me or associate me with a certain kind of, I guess you could call it contemporary occultism in a way, or occulture, because of the book that I wrote by that name. And I've had great training in different magical environments. I would say the first substantial and perhaps also the most important one was working with Topi, the Temple of Psychic Youth, and getting to know Genesis Peorage, and working with that crew for a long time. Topi ended, of course, in that kind of first phase in 91, 92, but we had already done so much, and it had meant so much for me as a young magician in a way. And then other things took over, and I had parallel strains, worked with the OTO for 30 years, and some Golden Dawn groups and some other groups also. And at the same time, I've also had this, a need for expression, a need for investigation that's not merely for my own sake. And ergo, you have, for instance, the project The Fenris Wolf, which is this journal or anthology that's been coming out basically since 1989. Sometimes a little bit less frequently, but that's still going strong, actually stronger than ever. And that contains what I now call magico anthropology. Meaning, why people are so interested in occultism, why magical thinking is so prevalent, why magic exists within human culture, and also, of course, the concept of occulture that Genesis coined once upon a time. I love looking into these topics and occurrences where I can see that something comes from a hidden environment, whether it's occult or just maybe secretive for other reasons, and see how those things or those signals seep out into the mainstream or the outer kind of known reality. And apart from that, I'm basically an author. I write all the time, love writing books, and I also make films, mainly documentary films about artists. So that's another interesting topic too. I'm very interested in creativity and why people create, basically. And that, I think, is the basic bio.
Oh, it's quite expansive. It's good. Yeah, I was sort of alluding to this before we started rolling the interview, but I was wondering what your take on the kind of, there seems to be a real movement at the moment on social media with occultism. There's some people with some significant followers on places like Instagram and the like, and TikTok and things like that. There seems to be like a boom in occultism there. I was wondering what your take on that might be.
Yeah, I think it's kind of inevitable, and I think it perhaps hasn't got anything to do with the social media aspect in itself, but of course, it has to do with that also, meaning you can have great outreach. And I think what's happened, say, these past, 50 years, maybe post-Crowley, you could say, so from 1947 or the 50s and onwards, we have seen a gradual opening up of things, of traditions, of former secrecy, and things have come out like little flowers coming up from seed underground. Maybe it sort of skyrocketed or burst out in the 1960s. But anyway, I think what we're seeing today is kind of a continuation of that process, where instead of a few flowers, we now have complete gardens of different kinds of flowers stemming from different kinds of cultures, and they grow in different kinds of gardens. So I think I tend to look at social media phenomena like gardens in a way. They carry the same ideas that have previously existed in books and in more traditional media, and it's what I meant by it's no surprise is that these ideas, they are also sentient in a way. They want to survive just as a human being or other organisms want to survive, and sometimes they get together and create clusters. I guess that's what's called, egregores, or groups or societies that then crossbreed and cross-fertilize with other strains. It's just a life. It's a life of ideas, and I think these ideas that we could call occult or sort of occult philosophically inclined, they are very strong right now because of the fact that they are completely ingrained. They're part of our survival instinct. And that's something that I've, it's not me developing it, but I've come to that conclusion after having looked at so much of what's going on today from my magical anthropological perspective, is that why all of these things are happening right now is because we need them. We need these ideas, and we may need them in a new shape or cross-fertilized to become stronger and more vital, because we need to think in new ways. They might actually be old ways, but that doesn't matter. To leave this sort of incredible stuck in a rut groove that humanity is in. And as we all know, it's not hard to be a pessimist today.
No.
And the reason for that is, of course, we are very deep in this groove. And I do think that younger generations specifically, they are as susceptible to these ideas as older people are, but they have a media outreach that is much more vital, at least if we're looking to measuring that by frequency. Then, of course, you can say that too much frequency or too many small signals can actually create noise. Sometimes it's better with one strong signal that sends without noise. And that's the dilemma of social media, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a new channel. I mean, these occult magical memes have been, expressing themselves, finding their way, for decades, for generations, literally for generations and generations in art, music, literature, and not even necessarily in an explicit way. They're there if you can see them, or you're looking for them, or in sometimes very explicit ways. And this is a new channel. It's flowing through, or like a putting out a branch or a root. It's sort of finding it for good and bad. It's finding its way there, and it's inevitable. And I think positive thing in and of itself, a positive thing even.
Absolutely, because I think simply that. As people say, the water finds its own level. I think it's a great thing when there's a lot of stuff out there, so people can find it, whether it's intuitive in their life and development processes, or whether they're getting it, rammed down their throats. It doesn't really matter. People need to be exposed to new ideas. And the problem, what I meant by noise, is also it's not merely noise within this sort of, occult cluster. It's also incredible amount of noise around that, which is just like the normal social media noise. So it might be hard to find things, but usually, again, the water finds its own level, and people who are curious and active and aware of the fact that they're active usually never have a problem in finding the right way. I mean, that's happened all along human history. As the saying used to go, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Maybe today it's something like, the student finds perhaps the TikTok channel or an Instagram account or whatever, that puts them on the right path.
So, I mean, you spoke briefly about your sort of occult interest, but what kind of drew you personally to esoteric, I should say, writings, or occult writings or occult practices in general? What's kind of your occult journey, as it were?
Well, I think one thing is simply generational, and I don't mean like my generation, but the period of life that I was in. When you're in your teenage years, which I was in the early to mid 80s, you're very curious and you're looking for things that are, has the potential to sort of drag you out of this sort of teenage depression or this comatose behavior of having to deal with growing up and stuff like that. And I come from a background where there was a lot of stuff, and my parents were very open-minded, so it was hard for me to rebel in a way. I could become like a staunch Christian perhaps to rebel, but I didn't. Instead, I explored what I could find, and at that time there were occult bookstores even in Stockholm, and I did find a lot of stuff. Crowley that I liked, but it was kind of too technical. When you're 14 and start reading Book of the Law, how much do you actually understand? Things like that. Whereas I found Lavey, found a great resonance there, and of course the other strain beyond the strictly generational was the fact that the culture that I liked a lot, meaning having to do with music and underground culture, was very, very intellectual. I'm thinking specifically, Throbbing Gristle, post-Throbbing Gristle, psychic TV, England's Hidden Reverse, that kind of territory, where the dissemination of references was so integrated in the cultural output. It was not a song that wasn't containing some reference, and in the sleeve notes and fanzines and this and that, and very much of that had to do with the occult. So you could say that was really an occulture. And I'm thinking specifically, I was very much into this this scene. So I guess one of the greatest finds for me there was this new reverence for Austin Spare, for instance. Kenneth Grant had written about Spare, but Kenneth Grant was kind of, esoteric. It was esoteric stuff for occult people. Whereas when Genesis sort of integrated, it became something else. It became part of an occulture that really interested me. So I found reading Spare's Book of Pleasure more revealing and inspiring than Crowley, for instance. But Crowley, of course, caught up with me later on. So in that sense, it was, I was curious, at a curious age, and intelligent enough and sort of English speaking enough to be able to read a lot of this material in English. And then, of course, it was part of the subculture that I was already involved in, meaning this kind of experimental music.
Yeah, and I think also with Spare, it's his artwork, that seduces you, doesn't it? And that speaks to you, and and his writing is comes sort of after. It comes a bit later. I mean, they complement each other very well, and you can't really understand one without the other. But for me as well, it's interesting. It's a very seductive. That's the sort of. I don't want to use the word gateway drug into Austin Osborne.
Yeah, but in a way it is, but in a good way, of course. I was thinking also of other kinds of culture. I mean, it wasn't just books written by occultists and magicians. There were also other, cultural expressions. And early on, I was, enamored with film, and I still am. And of course, when you find Kenneth Anger, for instance, and on these sort of second or third generation VHS cassettes, but still they're so beautiful and so filled with signal that became like an obsession for me. When I went to university in Stockholm, I wrote a dissertation or a thesis about Aleister Crowley's influence in Kenneth Anger's work. So like for me, it's like a complete obsession. So that's another strain. After the first phase, it bloomed into something that went beyond like a personal interest. It really became something that I lived in 24/7, working with Topi and working with the OTO, and eventually getting to meet Lavey and Kenneth Anger and all these things that were like beyond belief for me at the time. I couldn't understand how these things were happening, but they were. So for me, I think it had to do a lot with investment. I took it seriously, and I invested of my time, not just my dreams and my desires, but I worked hard to achieve these little steps, in a way, toward becoming integrated in all these environments that I was so enamored with.
And it's very refreshing, actually. It's not hearing a positive response. It's obviously something you really valued, and you haven't fallen into the trap of being, the sort of a petty sectarian. You're not interested.
No,
Some cult celebrities or wannabe cult celebrities, they, I think they, out of professional jealousy, they fall into this sort of petty sectarianism, one sort or another, and it's so refreshing actually hearing it being such a positive, life-affirming thing for you.
I'm happy to hear it, because it's funny that you say that, because for me that's always been very, very important. I've never actually come across, when I've been part of several different groups at the same time, maybe I've come across some, how could you be a member there? How could you be a member there? But I've never come across any like prejudice that has in any way sort of stopped me. Which is good, because then I would have left immediately. And this kind of open-mindedness, I think, has to do also with the reason why I have become engaged in a way to certain groups and have had loyalties, which you do, of course, hasn't been in a cultic way, to efface or sort of make myself go away and just become a little mindless creature doing someone else's will. On the contrary, I've gone into these environments and groups and social surroundings with great curiosity, of course, but also wanting to learn things. And then after a while, that's just how I function. I also want to give something back. So when I become interested enough, I get engaged in the sense that I want to work with the structure. That's what I did with Topi, and that's what I did with OTO in Sweden, and that's what I've done with Church of Satan, which has never been like an order in that traditional sense. But for instance, I translated the Satanic Bible into Swedish and published it in, I think, 1996 or something. So that's what I mean. I get involved, and then I want to be part of it and give something back in a way, but not to the point where I don't exist. On the contrary, where I get more space in a way, more room.
Exactly, and as you just said now, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear, and those influences already came to you at a time when you were open to them, and there was fertile soil. I mean, Lavey himself complains about people joining the Church of Satan at some points, and purely with the sort of intention so they could boast of the kudos of turning their back on it. And it's interesting, and that happens now. It's still very much something you sort of experience today. And it's not peculiar to the Church of Satan. It's not peculiar to, I don't know, the Fraternity of Inner Light. It's not peculiar to the OTO. It's peculiar to the people involved if they come with their own.
It's a particular kind of I don't know, disgruntled psyche in a way that I think exists in any human dynamic. It could be a soccer team or a soccer fans or occultists or any other group dynamic. It's just that some people, if they don't get immediately gratified on their own terms, then they will turn their back and become even more disgruntled.
Well, I think also as well, they're motivated by their own, they've got their own agenda to grind. And they have a predisposed agenda, and they're looking for confirmation of their own biases, basically. Yeah. And that says a lot more about the individual and where they're at. And the sad thing is, it's often people are very original and imaginative and creative, and have got definitely their own thing going, and that's grand. And as I say, it should be in a healthy thing and a fertile thing. But it's sort of disingenuous to themselves ultimately, because you're defining yourself in negative terms and not positive terms.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. Let's get on to some Lavey. The first thing that struck me actually looking at your book was I didn't actually realise that until reading the book, that you had a personal relationship with Lavey, and you were even married by him.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So could you talk about that, like how you became involved with Anton Lavey and kind of, how that relationship blossomed?
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I never get tired of talking about it. So basically what happened was so, I don't know, magical. I'm not afraid to say it. For me, it was very magical. And even when I talk about it today, it is so bizarre, because basically I told you I was interested, and I bought occult books, and I had struck up kind of a resonance with the Satanic Bible, and I think I got the Satanic Rituals also, and I liked it because it was kind of different from Crowley. It was more to the point. I had more like cultural references that I liked. and I liked the American trash culture, and I loved, these big bosomed blondes like Jane Mansfield. And then finding out, that Jane Mansfield had this fling allegedly with LaVey. They did know each other, but I think they also used each other for PR purposes. But anyway, that thing was sort of created meltdowns in my teenage or post-teenage mind. It was just so fascinating. And so when I started a band, which was around 1987, the first record we recorded was a song called Sweet Jane, just like the Lou Reed song. And it was a tribute song or a homage to Jane Mansfield and LaVey and their relationship, because I was simply so obsessed by that. At this time, I was working with Topi in Scandinavia and being frequently in touch with Genesis. And Genesis said that, why don't you send this record to LaVey? I think he would appreciate it. And Jen had the address, so we did that. And then I didn't expect anything, basically. But I did get a letter back from Anton Lavey, and that was such a mind blower. Not only acknowledging receipt and the fact that he liked the initiative of the record, and that Jane would be very happy and pleased. Things like this keeps her alive. He wrote something like that, and also he made me a member of the Church of Satan, and that to me was, I can't, tell you, it's like completely mind-blowing. And I still have the letter here in my office, framed, actually. And so basically we kept in touch, by fax or by letter. And, 1 year later, approximately, I went over for the first time and got to hang out at the Black House and went out to dinner and listened to him play music. And of course, during the same trip, I write about that in the book also, LaVey set me up with Kenneth Anger. I had another entry because I was at university at this time having written that thesis about Crowley's influence in Anger's films. So I had some entries because I really wanted to meet him. It was basically LaVey calling Anger when I was there, saying that this Swedish guy is okay. So on the same trip, I met both of these huge icons for me, and many other fascinating people as well. And then that's basically how it continued almost every year up until 1993. And we did the same thing, hung out, talked, had dinner, listened to music, watched a lot of movies and things like that. And it was just, he was very generous, welcoming, and he was very curious also about what I thought about things and sort of peeves and obsessions that I had, or it felt like a very friendly atmosphere. And then of course he died in 97, and I didn't have the opportunity to travel after 93. He was just preoccupied with other things, so that was sad. Everybody feels he died too young in a way, and that also became kind of a premise for the film that I made a few years ago. It's called Anton Lavey Into the Devil's Den, that then bloomed into this book that just came out. Meaning, I felt, and I have felt all throughout these decades since then, that, whoa, what the hell happened? It still affects me. And, we talked about things and I remember things. And it was basically, I had the impression that he was like seed sowing. He was planting things, not in any way a negative way. It was, I think, in my interpretation, a way for him of securing a legacy in one person of things that he knew that I would be interested in. And when I started comparing my experiences with other people, some I knew back then and some were newer acquaintances, but basically people who had met him during this last decade of his life, we shared a lot of experiences. They also had that feeling of, there were things going on between the lines and topics and themes and focus on certain people. And you could say that that's just how friends are, you talk about certain things that you both like, but most of these people that I talked to and filmed and who are also in the book had that thing where we feel that he left us a special kind of legacy, not having to do with, magic or magic tricks or anything, magic power. It was more like a cultural seed, leaving certain composers, authors, people that he found satanically important. And it was such a strong, I don't know, inclination or interest to find out more about whether these other people had had the same experience, that it actually turned into these two projects, the film and the book that just came out. So for me, it's like, it's, you know, in a way become an obsession, but it's been a very, very creative and very, very pleasant obsession, I have to say. I worked with it a lot, but it's been worth every moment of it. And I hope also that I've done our friendship justice by, you know, making this film and this book. Maybe that's what he had in mind, you know, 30 years ago. that you know, maybe one day Carl will make a film and write a book. Who knows?
Well, actually, I mean, I'm really intrigued by you saying that, because when I was reading your book, Mr. Abrahamson, I mean, what I appreciated so much about it is that, you know, if I may be given the liberty, I've read stuff before about LaVey, and it sort of wasn't really what I wanted. It was somehow disappointing, or didn't have the depth, or whatever. But your book really is the antidote to that. It really, you know, I was thinking, whilst I was reading that, to really sort of sit back and step back from myself a bit and think, well, why is this working so well? Why is this book? And then it's partly your own experiences and your own actually unique, you know, your positive approach to them, but also, you know, the part of it, I think, is because at the time has passed. We can step back and look at a wider picture and get a better perspective on LaVey, his work, his life, and and as a figure, a cultural and philosophical figure, the magical occult aspects. I'm not devaluing those at all. Actually, quite the opposite. But it's interesting if you try to disentangle and try to just look in through the lens of a cultural and a philosophical figure, an influencer, as we would use it the term today. You get a much better perspective, and that's a wonderful way in, I think.
Thank you. No, I'm very happy to hear that, because making the film was more, a film is more of a form, you know, it's kind of a set form. And for instance, you cannot have all of the material that I had because it would be too long of a film. And there are certain, you know, ways you go about making this film. And I was happy about that. But of course, it dawned on me even during the process that, whoa, kill your darlings. You know, I would love to have this inside. So that was also another impetus or incentive to carry on with the project in a way. But not only that, you know, it was just also this thing where I think that's one of the reasons why I think the book works well, because it's so obviously subjective. It has no aspirations towards, you know, what you could call like a journalistic objectivity. I am clear from the beginning with the fact that this is like the first few the 5 chapters in the beginning where I sort of write about my experiences. It's a subjective story, and people get that immediately. And then with the people in general, I had these sort of standard questions to try to focus, basically. Otherwise, it could have expanded even more into different directions. But that also that focused on their subjective experiences. So I think that's, I don't know if I can call it endearing in a way. It's a kind of a quagmire, because if you want to be a journalist or a writer writing about something, you're taught about, you know, should be a little bit more objective, and why aren't there any critical voices, etc. But that's not interesting for me, because I think all those critical voices, they've had their exposure for a long time, and I think I don't think it's like I'm spreading too much sunshine either. It's just very subjective, and my experiences, they were always great. They were highly inspiring, and as were the ones that the people I interviewed were. So I may have chosen people on my team in a way, but why not? Because their stories are so intriguing, and I hope that the mass, the actual cluster of everything, is inspiring to people, and that's actually what I've heard so far. I mean, it's just been out for whatever it is, a week or two. But the feedback I'm getting is that it brings new stuff to the table. And it does so in an inspirational or inspiring way. And that makes me very happy, of course.
Yeah, I think that's one of that's the other thing that works so well from my experience of reading it, is the way that it's rounded out by so many other voices, you know.
Yeah.
That fleshes it out, you know, and that gives it an extra dimensions, literally, you know, different aspects of people's experiences and approaches, and they're actually, you know, that worked really, really well. That gave it actually, in a strange, you know, I mean, that's their own personal experiences, but actually it shows that in the round, you know, you get a broader picture.
Yes.
Yes, and there's something actually more objective about that in a way.
Yeah, you could say that. And I mean, it's just it was a very defined space, and it was a very defined time, meaning that many of these meetings, they took place at the Black House or at dinner at a restaurant, but we always returned to the Black House. So that was like the center, and it was the same for all of these people. Because of the fact that he was, you know, in failing health and not too much energy, and he felt very safe and comfortable at home. So that's like a no-brainer also. And what I mean by the time is that it was a time in his life he didn't know that it was like end times. And he had, the last time I met him in person, Blanche, his partner, was just pregnant and about to give birth a couple of months later. So he was very happy about that. And that was like a vitalizing thing. And he got to have, I guess, 4 years with the son, Xerxes. So that was very good. But still, the times that all of us had, they were defined by him, you know, saying that, you know, come at 8 o'clock and we'll go out for dinner, and then we'll come back, and then you probably didn't leave the Black House until like 8 or 9 in the morning, because they were active in the nighttime. So the time and the space were defined and also confined to these things. And that's another reason why it's so easy to compare experiences, because if it had been like in 1969, it could have been at some, you know, convention in Chicago, or at a group ritual in New York, or in the Black House, or a much more chaotic, in a way, scene in which it can be hard to discern who a person actually is, because there's just too much going on. But at this time, I think also deliberate on Lavey's side, he felt calm and controlled and safe, and no one was let in that wasn't sort of pre-approved in a way by some kind of communication or some kind of cultural output, basically passing a few tests by what you'd done, you know, kind of meritocracy in a way. And for me, it was like, you know, the Fenris Wolf had just come out, and I made the records, and that first record with Genesis and Paula, the At Stockholm CD, and things like that. Meaning I was a mover and a shaker in a way. I was producing things, so that was also like a ticket into this world. And it was the same for most of these people. And once you were there, it was basically the same things going on, but it was so inspiring for all of these people, including me, to be allowed to be there in a way. But it wasn't just like, you know, allowed, like if we were some kind of objects of scrutiny from his side. He was very warm. He was very generous, very welcoming, and also genuinely curious, I have to say.
Interesting. So, I mean, we've had some
detractors,
naysayers on in the past on this show. One example I could say is Nicholas Schreck, who is not a fan of Mr. LaVey, but we also had Isaac Bonwitz as well, who was more of a fan, I'd say, but the thing they both brought up, and I've heard brought up elsewhere, is Anton Lavey isn't a quote-unquote proper magician or a proper occultist. He was more of a showman. I was wondering about your kind of take on that. Like, do you see him as a quote-unquote proper occultist, or was he more a kind of, more of a celebrity, I guess?
Right. Well, I thank you for the question. I love that question, and I do have my own sort of experience with that. I would say he's probably among the very finest magicians I've ever met, and I've met a few actually. And the thing is that I don't need to be sort of antithetical and go to Freck or possibly Bonowitz or other people of that kind of mind frame. You know, they're critical, so you have to take that into account. But what I mean is that, and that's also one of the chapters in the book is the one called Anton Lavey, Magical Innovator. I mean, already from before the Magic Circle, which was the group before the Church of Satan, he was very interested in magic, and he, in the film, there's actual video of him talking about, you know, how he'd read all of these old occult books and stuff like that, but found that it didn't really work. And he came to this conclusion that you have to be on the side of the forces that you want to, I don't know, use or work with in a way. And it's so funny because he describes it sort of like in a gangster movie. You know, you have to show your loyalty, and then you can have a loyalty back, and, you know, a sense of respect and courtesy that's mutual. And, you know, but that's you know, how he defined it back then. In the Magic Circle, which was pre-Church of Satan, he was doing a lot of experimentation, intellectual studies, also together with other people, holding lectures, and, you know, going through a lot of weird stuff, including the literature of not only of Lovecraft, but basically coming from the pulp tradition. Frank Belknap Long, for instance, was a key influence here, plus German expressionist films, etc. And these sort of cultural inputs became the foundation of like the aesthetic structure of the Church of Satan. And then, of course, in the Church of Satan, you suddenly, you know, wham, bam, brought in this provocative term and a kind of a diabolical lore, and tying it in with tradition of opposition, and also in a way anti-Christian or anti-monotheist perspectives. But that wasn't, you know, the only thing. During this time, you know, as he wrote about in the Satanic Bible that came out in '69, there was, you know, lesser magic, which you could call, you know, some kind of Machiavellian or manipulative magic, and there was also higher magic, greater magic, meaning full-on ritual magic for purposes and emotional investment in the moment. He was greatly influenced by Speer, by Freud. He was greatly influenced by Crowley, much more than he cared to, you know, let it be known at the time. But Anger told me that himself, and Anger lent him books, and, you know, he was very, very hardcore in his magical explorations. And the Church of Satan was the workshop, the toolbox that allowed for that. So even back then, you know, he created a magician by taking these different strains and working with it for his own benefit. Then you can say that, okay, so he went into some kind of seclusion in a way in the mid-70s because it was too much attention, etc., and he focused on just leading a good life. And I think that's where it comes from, that, you know, he didn't really do anything, but he had just come from like 15 years of hardcore magical activities, solo and in group form, with all of what that entails in terms of negative group dynamics and you know, chaos, whatever. But then he also, after the 70s, meaning in the 80s and onwards, drifted into the logical progression of Satanism, which is a massive kind of egotism. So he drifted back in a way into himself and constructed magics that are amazing. And that's one of the chapters in the book, the one called Anton Lavey, Magical Innovator. All of these concepts that he brought to, I don't know, I guess we could call it our table, the table of the people who are occultly inclined and who want to work with techniques and, you know, specific things. He brought in working with your own preferred cultural expression. He was a musician by profession, and he used music not only in his ritual, but music as his ritual. And I've seen that performed, or played out, and it was very, very, very powerful. So I would say that he may not have been a traditionalist in some kind of, something stemming from Western ceremonial traditions. He was just a freewheeling, pragmatic guy who took magic very, very seriously, but he disliked what he called the occultniks, the people who were too stuck in a rut within structures or traditions, or having this need to be subjugated to a pyramidal hierarchy. So I think that he was so innovative that people like the ones you mentioned, or perhaps even other people also, they can't get it simply. And it's not because I'm not saying they're stupid. It's just that he brought so much new stuff to the table that these people can't relate. And that's in a way what I hope to do with the book, is to give it a sense of context, what it actually is. It isn't just him playing some old tunes on the synthesizer. He was doing ritual at the time. And also, like you mentioned, I actually got married with my girlfriend at the time, and I had the chance to be in the ritual chamber and see him perform ritual. And it was I don't know, it was terrifyingly powerful, I have to say. You could argue that I was young and open-minded and this and that, and I had great respect. That may be the case, but I still remember it as being incredibly powerful, and that also was very, very inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've tended to sort of look at it, and I might be right and wrong, is like we were saying earlier. These new channels present themselves, and the meme, or it sort of flows into it. It will find its way, and Lavey was very interested in film. He was a theatrical character. And he adopted these roles, or these guises with absolute sincerity, and that's how he expressed himself, and that's how he understood as well the psychology of like having a certain very distinct appearance and conveying that.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that he actually came from, a circus or a sideshow, a carnival background, where he had seen how these things work, on this, what he called the lesser magic level, which is basically manipulation, how you can affect people by appearance, by behavior, which is basically psychology, But some people have argued that that's all it was, but I would argue that's not the case. He was also very interested in ritual magic, and he had a very psychologically savvy way of looking at this. He wasn't religious in that sense. I could argue that Crowley had a kind of a religious approach to it. He claimed to be very empirical, perhaps so, but his mind was religious, whereas I would say that Lavey was a lot more rational, yet he had respect for the fact that if you do certain things and invest a lot of emotion in it, things will happen. And it's kind of inexplicable how that happens, but sometimes you don't need to know. You don't have to be an empiricist. You can just be a magician, plain and simple.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder, you were talking about him being more of a freewheeling kind of magician. I mean, that certainly shows up in his own writings, where he does tend to borrow quite heavily. It reminds me a little bit of Grant, a little bit of Kenneth Grant. He has this kind of he takes one system and then sort of combines it with narrative fiction, for example, like Lovecraft. I mean, that's the obvious crossover between Grant and Lavey, isn't it? That they both kind of incorporated Lovecraft into their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's brilliant, on both these gentlemen's part, because why should we exclude anything that elevates us in the moment of ritual or in life? So I think that all of these things, it could be. I'm also very, very fascinated by one specific story by this American filmmaker, Larry Wessel. He's in the book, and he met Lavey, similarly. And he also had this moment late at night sometime at the Black House, where LaVey took out a book and read this poem, an American poet called I think Don Blanding, and it's just this kind of funny poem about someone who talks about his dream house, what his dream house would be, and it would be filled with things from his journeys and exotic things and stories and stuff like that. And that's an example of one moment in space and time where LaVey read something to this guy, and now again, whatever it is, like so many decades later, Larry has just wrapped up a film that he has structured around that poem. He calls it Larry Wessel's Palace of Wonders, and it's basically him interviewing a lot of weird people, but he looks at it as his dream house filled with these things. And it came from the impetus of that very space, that very time when LaVey read him this poem. So you see that culture, even small things like fragments of a book, fragments of a poem, can have the power to linger on, in the psyches of people and affect them much, much, much later. And I would argue much more than, diligently performing the banishing ritual of the pentagram or delving into the Abrahamson working or, something like that. Because perhaps the greatest magic lies in the human psyche and how that is affected also by emotional spheres and in our interactions with other people. And again, both Grant and LaVey and many other people also love this kind of pulpy fiction that is now, I guess, called cosmic horror, which is a great term, where things are sort of seeping in from the unknown, the true unknown, because that was happening at that time. Man didn't land on the moon, allegedly, until 1969. So before that, you had these sort of explorations of space, and before that, the engineers who were working and developing space travel, they had all been, fed with pulp fiction. They were kids who read, Weird Tales and all of these things, science fiction magazines, who were inspired by these incredible stories of space travel. And they were the people who actually made it happen.
A bit like Jack Parsons is another obvious example there.
Of course.
And it's also interesting to reflect on the fact that Lovecraft and it's been published now. It's almost Tweedy with respectability, but published by Penguin.
Yeah.
As classics. Something I would never believe would be possible not that long ago. But it's endured, and I think, and it's also curious reflecting on it that with Kenneth Grant and LaVey, that the H.P. Lovecraft thing hasn't been really sort of explored more. I mean, LaVey had this order of the trapezoid, and the shining trapezoid, of course, appears in the Lovecraft's The Haunter of the Dark. And it's curious that hasn't been sort of thrashed out more. I mean, there's a couple of books in there, I'm sure, and.
Absolutely. I mean, it's seeped through. I mean, I'm not saying that it seeped through them specifically, meaning Grant and LaVey, but I mean, the French author Michel Houellebecq, who is completely, highbrow in a way, has written substantially about Lovecraft. It's even included in one of the, as you say, the Penguin editions. So it is absolutely out there in the mainstream. And this series that streamed a while ago called Lovecraft County, I think, and basically it's around there. I mean, and the reason again, I think, why these things pop up at certain times, it's because the culture or the unconscious part of culture is ready for it, meaning that cosmic horror might not be such a bad term after all, because we always dread the unknown. And when we have too many problems in our daily grind, that was actually happening, although the 50s were, booming in a way. The 40s were completely affected by world wars and, very hard times. and before that the 30s also with financial depression and all kinds of things. The 50s were booming economically, but then of course you had the Cold War happening. So there was always this kind of negative tension going on. And what do you do then in terms of escapism? Well, you look beyond that. You look up instead, and you dream and you read science fiction. And most of the science fiction is actually not that, gay or happy and, filled with sunshine and, getting to a new planet and it's all lovely. It's fucking dire and catastrophe and aliens and disaster and death in space, So it's really a kind of a zeitgeist thing. That I think has had escapistic potential, for generations. And I think that's what these people like Lavey and Grant picked up, of course, because it affected them, but not exclusively. It also affected other kids, other young people in similar ways. But the Grant and Lavey, they both could contextualize it and also integrate it. I mean, Lavey certainly did. In their own rituals even, and that goes for certain kinds of movies too. The film noir aesthetic, the German expressionist aesthetic, the Tesla coil, working with electricity, which is as a real physical force in the ritual chamber, lighting things, basically creating a total environment or a space that is so conducive for the kind of mind frame or emotional structure that you want to have in that particular ritual. So it's these elaborate, you could call it memes in a way also, that were integrated in something much greater as an ingredient in a powerful dish.
Yeah, I mean, as Rapon suggests, the artist is the antenna of the race. I think he says
exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. So going back to Lavey a bit, why he has this kind of occult knowledge and a kind of a schooling somewhat by the time that he forms the Order of the Trapezoid and the Church of Satan. Why do you think he sort of resonated so much with the kind of concept of Satan? Why do you think he chose Satan as his ride or die, as they say?
Yeah, I think it's to keep it simple, I would say it's a twofold thing. One is a genuine appreciation of the controversy and potentially the powerful thing of someone who is the ultimate outsider. If you're willingly an outsider, you can be quite powerful. If you're an unwilling outsider, that basically means that you're bullied and sort of ostracized, and that's a negative thing. But the willing outsider is powerful because people fear what's outside. So you can take that fear and turn it into energy that can be quite constructive and powerful. And also then you have the romantic, diabolical lore of history, not only from the monotheist cultures, but from all over the world. There's always been that kind of trickster figure in each culture, and it has been ultimately a benevolent one, because I tend to look at it as Satan being part of the immune system of the culture in question. Satan is the adversary, the opposer, the critical one, pointing at what's wrong, at the hypocrisy, at people's vanities, at all these things that might actually, if people act on it, can turn the culture into a more healthy and strong organism. That, of course, is a kind of controversial standpoint, because if you talk to a monotheist, it's just like very hard, because they will say, no, it's deception, it's all evil, and you get involved in this sort of moronic, psychotic discussions. But so that's one way, the historical, traditional, diabolical lore and the psychology of the outsider. That's one thing. But then also, as was mentioned, he came from a carny background. He knew how to get attention, and he wanted attention. He wanted to have a group based on what the so-called magic circle had been working with for many, many years, all throughout the 60s. And now he wanted to profit from the fact that he was very knowledgeable. And he had started writing essays for their newsletter, Cloven Hoof, in the Church of Satan. And when that was going, he realized that it was a good thing because he got a lot of attention. If you have someone creating the Church of Satan in San Francisco in the 1960s, where all eyes were on San Francisco anyway, you know, you will get a lot of attention. And if you want it, that's good. If you don't want it, it's probably bad. But he wanted it. He wanted to be on TV and radio and all these shows and getting paid to be interviewed, having journalists and photographers from all over the world coming to his black house and sort of spreading the information, not only about what they were doing that evening, but also about the philosophy. You know, there's a kind of a dissemination that also made him money. And then a couple of years later, in '69, there was the Satanic Bible, and that's just like bringing on more of this controversy that turned out to be very, very profitable. Yet that doesn't mean that it's insubstantial. I think that he orchestrated this and strategized this in a very good way. And I think also everything comes with a price tag. It comes with a price. And that hit him, I think, in the mid-'70s when it had simply been too intense a time during this, let's call it the first decade. Too much exposure, too many, negative personal dynamics, and, live and learn, and you can't force on forever. So I think that first decade from 66 maybe up to 76 was a learning experience for him, but it also made him a lot of money, and there were members, the books were selling, and he was just on a roll basically.
You could say in a way Crowley was similar in the way he approached the kind of publicization of his work. Crowley also enjoyed the, to be in the public eye. He enjoyed being paid to go and speak at places. He enjoyed that kind of sort of using celebrity in a way to kind of get his message across.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that's ingrained in all occultists. It's just a one kind of special, brand. And I think it has to do with I don't know, you could call it creative neurosis in a way. Crowley, I think, was actually more of an actor, with an actor's neurosis. He wanted attention like all the time, like some actors do. I'm not saying all of them are like this, but it's something like being on stage and demanding attention in a way. Whereas LaVey, I think, was a little bit more of a, as we said, a word that I try to avoid, but a showman. He was a little bit more strategic and appeared at times in his robe and with his plastic horns and these things when the photographers were there. He wasn't so neurotic that he had to demand attention all the time. He popped up very much like, a PR savvy person.
Yeah, and I think that spotlight is very much a two-edged sword as well, and it's something that can easily sort of slip out of control and inevitably will at some point. I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, my tendency when thinking about Satanism as a sort of philosophical idea is very much based on 19th century Gothic Romanticism, the romantic anarchists, the especially in Europe in the 1890s, naughty 90s, the Satan of Felicine Ropes, of Baudelaire, of Huysmans. It's the when Christianity becomes this deadening force, this sort of suffocating force, the opposite to that, the opposition becomes the liberator.
Absolutely. And that was completely ingrained in LaVey's brand of Satanism. But he also brought something else to the table, and that's something that happened during the first half of the 20th century, and that was the emergence of psychology and the emergence of psychoanalysts. Analysis. And I mean, he was a self-professed Freudian. He also liked Jung and Wilhelm Reich, and he was very savvy about what they had actually written about. And that said, and also he had worked in the circus, and one of the things that he did there was he worked with the big cats, lions, tigers. For a long time, he even had a lion at home. So basically, he had a great affinity for animals, not necessarily ferocious ones, but animals in general. And one of the key tenets is that man is is just another animal, and we are driven by the same kind of drives as animals do. We have a kind of superstructure that is intellectual, but that can be very deceiving. And then, of course, you have the psychological or psychoanalytical approach, whereas you have to, in a way, as Jung said, you have to acknowledge your dark side and you have to work with it. Otherwise, it will become, almost demonic and make you do things that you actually don't want to do because of the fact that you're not doing the things that you want to do. And Freud was, of course, with his sexual theories, Lavey completely agreed with them and said that you have to be sexually, free, sexually honest, sexually unrestrained. As long as you're with consenting people, you should do whatever you feel that you want to do. That was very radical, even in the so-called free love 1960s of San Francisco, because it's not really free love if you're just high and having sex with someone in Golden Gate Park. But what they were doing in the Church of Satan was like real experimentation to get to know themselves much, much better, what they really enjoyed. So it's also a kind of an Epicurean philosophy where it's all about pleasure, feeling good, being strong, all these life-affirming things. And we haven't really seen much of that in traditional occultism, and it's always had some kind of strange religious residue from Christianity or other things. Even Crowley has that. Crowley was basically, a Dionysian in the Nietzschean sense, but there was always some kind of I don't know. It's not moralism. I mean, some people would laugh when I call Crowley a moralist, but he was just a bit older. He was stemming from the 19th century, whereas Lavey was obviously a 20th century man.
Yeah, I mean, Crowley was obviously a Victorian. He was born in the Victorian age, so he was, the sort of his feet, so to speak, were sort of grounded in that. So he's sort of coming from that perspective. I mean, people, and funny enough, actually, Crowley is very ethical. I mean, he constantly writes about the importance of beliefs and values and having your own beliefs, and he's constantly doing that. But that would take us off the point, I suppose. But I just sort of sat thinking about it. And it's going to sound very strange at first, but in the 1890s, you had, it sounds weird thinking of it as a satanic in a novel, but you had Worlds, the Picture of Dorian Gray, and also the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the themes in those are about that duality, that duality bubbling to the surface, and of course in the early 1901, I think it was, you had Freud's In the Interpretation of Dreams. And it seems amazing that those books actually were sort of, there's something in the air. I mean, people have said that before. There's something in the air, and that duality is sort of bubbling up, but also it's demanding that need to reconcile it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, I think that's where Lavey was really intelligent. And I think that whether that was consciously so or unconsciously so, that's kind of besides the point, because we will never know that. But what I mean is that culture dictates. We are not really dictated by morality or by passing fads or trends or moralistic incentives. It's really cultural expressions that form and decide the zeitgeist on a longer term. Like these examples that you mentioned, they are basically, two of them are fictional, and one is, let's call it, experimental at the time. So meaning they were not, by authorities in any way saying this is how it is, but still they were incredibly powerful, and they still are in their definition. Again, like you mentioned that Ezra Pound quote, like little antennae that these people caught things with, probably not consciously. They just sort of took whatever they felt in and expressed it in their own words, and that still resonates. And again, I think that Lavey was absolutely consciously aware of it. I wouldn't swear on it, I wouldn't bet on it, but I think he used culture very much to affect change. Why else would he have name dropped so many people who were important to him in his books. There are these dedication lists in the Satanic Witch and in the Satanic Rituals, and many of these books, and in his essays, which are basically just short and quite humorous. But there's plenty of stuff there that's like little traces for some future detective to join the dots in this mystery that is LaVey and Satanism. And some things may appear to be completely disparate or even contradictory, but when you look at it and sort of scratch the surface, you realize, whoa, this really makes sense in the context of this other thing. And you could argue also that it's just one man, one mind, one life's experience, and he wants to share what's been good for him. And that may also be the whole truth in a way. But if so, that man was very, very powerful and intelligent to the extent that we could absolutely call him objectively a magician, because he affects change in accordance with his will.
Mm. One thing I was kind of interested in talking to you about was how do you feel LaVey's philosophies kind of being carried forward post his death? I mean, obviously we had the Aquino split, and I'd like to actually hear your thoughts on maybe how he responded to that, and how that affected him, the Templar set forming and all this kind of thing. But really, how do you feel? I mean, do you feel his philosophy is being well represented these days by the Church of Satan and maybe by the Templar set?
Yeah, I can only speak from my own experience, and because I've always sort of hung out with or befriended and stayed friends with some people in the Church of Satan, and they are still great friends and have great respect for what they're doing, and they are doing intelligent things in the sense that they are also focusing on cultural promotion, no demagogia. It's just the website is filled with stuff constantly, promoting cultural things that are relevant to them, and also adding things from the archive, basically creating something that is more than just a website for members. It is creating a kind of an egregore, and I think maybe things like my book and also the book that I published a couple of years ago called California Infernal. That's just a photo book with German paparazzo who took a lot of pictures of LaVey and Jane Mansfield and stuff like that. All of these things sort of gel together in a kind of an egregorian way, little cells of a body in a way. So I think what the Church of Satan are doing is that they're aware of how these things work, and I think they're doing a great job. They represent it. They see to it that his legacy and his memory is respected, but also to infuse things with new blood, they are also adding things to the canon. A couple of years ago, there was a book by Bob Johnson called The Satanic Warlock, which is like a follow-up, I guess, or a complementary volume to The Satanic Witch that actually came out in 1971 first. So it's a living thing. It's a living, it's a group that's alive. Temple of Set, I don't know. I had some, personal information, and I think that it could be true. You never know, because everyone is dead or half dead, or it's been a lot of water under these bridges. But basically, it could be true because of the fact that many of these rifts it's not only the occult world, but in any world that become almost mythologized. He broke away and created his own. That's what people do. But what is the spark of that thing? Is it like huge differences in approach? Not really. I think what happened, and this is my carrying on a speculation, was that Aquino had actually hit on LaVey, in a bisexual way, and LaVey had kindly, politely declined the offer, and that became kind of it's hard for people to be sexually or emotionally denied. That's something we all have experience of at some point in life. And so whether that's true or not, I don't know. I don't want to be the sort of teller of tall tales. But anyway, they broke away, and one of the key things that is different is Aquino's integration of something that could be called an anthropomorphic or a more concrete devil figure, or a Setian entity, or you can call it whatever you want to, meaning that that's a real thing. Whereas for the Church of Satan and LaVey, it was always a symbolic thing. Certainly there's a dark force in nature, but it doesn't take on this mythologized, romanticized form. And then we have later on the younger Satanists who are doing Satanic Temple, some other people, and they are they have created their own baton in a way. They're not running with the old baton. They've created their own baton, and they are focusing on something completely different than the Church of Satan, and yet they call themselves Satanists. And I think in a way it's inevitable, and I think it's healthy. The one doesn't take away from the other. I think there will always be, young bucks or young people coming up claiming that, the old is dead and gone, and it's only the new that's viable and vital. I have nothing negative to say about them personally. They, for instance, show my documentary about LaVey on their Satanic Temple TV station online, and I've been interviewed there a couple of times, and I have no problem with that. It's just a different thing, same but different in a way. I don't know what their take on the Satan figure is, whether they believe in some kind of anthropomorphic thing. I haven't really gone down that path too much. But the people I've been involved with have been very sympathetic and nice to me. So that's all I can say about that. And, this kind of dynamic will always carry on. When there will be, in 10 years' time, there will be some new group saying that, the Satanic Temple are complete, conservative assholes.
Yeah, it's quite refreshing to hear that, though, because, this goes all the way back to, mainstream Christianity as well. There's this sort of feeling that groups certainly seem to have that, you can't have more than one group doing, one particular thing. There's this sort of mutual exclusivity kind of problem, isn't there? Especially in the occult, that group, they're doing it wrong, that kind of thing. It's quite refreshing to hear someone say, actually, it's great, that everyone's doing that everyone's putting their own spin on this kind of thing, and they can all kind of coexist peacefully, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's really nothing you can do to stop it either, It's just not like, what could you do? Oh, they're waving the wand the wrong way, call the police. What can you do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was actually, one thing that just came to mind whilst you were talking about other groups, and there's obviously a whole other form of Satanism as well that's become a bit more prevalent in the news recently, a more sinister form of Satanism, I'd say. Have you ever come across the groups like, I don't know, the Order of Nine Angles, that kind of thing? That seems to be unfortunate. It seems to kind of, every now and then, people will sort of perceive LaVey's Satanism in the same kind of, in the same fold as this more kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, sinister Satanism, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, it's been a long time, because the thing is that the Fenris Wolf became my, my calling card in a way, but also I wanted things for it, and I wanted to have a wide variety of things. So I can remember being in touch with Order of the Nine Angles sort of in the late 80s. And they were also very networking, and I think there was a lot of information just swimming about in newsletters and stuff like that. Topi and IoT, and in newsletters from occult bookstores, and so I think that could it be in I think it's Fenris Wolf number 3. That there's something by Order of Nine Angles, but that came out in the 1993s, so it was still a long time. And since then, I haven't really followed what's happening with that kind of sinister strain. Usually, it's just very, very few people, and these few people can be very eloquent and ambitious and have a lot of signal, especially now in internet times, so that sometimes things appear to be much more than it actually is. That I think is all I have to say about that, because I'm not too savvy about what's going on. Maybe things like that also pop up. Just thinking almost symbiotically with when there's some kind of satanic panic going on. It's like when there's someone trying to rip open a wound that might not even exist, then there will be forces like I don't know, infection or pus coming out of this wound saying, yeah, we are an infection in a way. I don't mean to liken anyone, with pus or infection, but what I mean is that some tendencies, some occurrences always go hand in hand with things that are antithetical. And for me, that's not really necessarily satanic per se. Because I think for me, Satanism, like Lavey defined it, is much more of a proactive and positive thing. It's not merely a reaction to something that's idiotic, because we all know how much time we wasted in being in pointless dialogues with people who will never change their mind. There's no point. So I don't know, the sinister Satanists, what they do. Maybe they listen to this music, whatever it's called, black metal, things like that. For me, that has nothing to do with Satanism.
And I think also as well, you have sort of disturbed, troubled individuals, and they they act out their disturbance actually.
And then maybe they get like a little shorter prison sentence if they claim they were, Satan made me do it or something. Yeah. That's been the case so many times, and then they get reformed and start being Bible thumpers in prison, and then they get off earlier.
Yeah, quite a few examples of that. Okay, well, I mean, this has been great. Can you tell us about any upcoming projects you might have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard. We are quite active on many different fronts. But for instance, now working on promoting this book, but of course there are many other books that are happening. I'm working on one that's another crossover from the film world. I've shot a lot of documentaries, these interviews with artists, for instance, and it's going to take me a long time, probably a couple of years before I'm caught up with that, to make all these films. But I am going to release a book, again, with the fully transcribed interviews with these artists, and that will be called An Art Apart. And that's something that's happening this spring. So that's going to be fun. Also, hopefully, an inspiring book with these sort of radical artists that talk about their creativity. That's very interesting. And then, of course, there will be not one, but two new issues of The Fenris Wolf coming out this spring, number 11, which is summing up of the papers and lectures from a conference me and my wife, Vanessa Sinclair, had in Italy a couple of years ago, actually at the castle where Ezra Pound was staying towards the end of his life. It's about psychoanalysis, art, and the occult. And very interesting papers there. And Fenris Wolf 12, that follows shortly after that, is like a normal Fenris, if you could say that there is such a thing, meaning a plethora, a bouquet of wild and crazy eclectic takes on occultism's new and old.
And just before we end, we just have to, you touched on it very briefly, but humor is very important to Lavey, and I always think that's it's something I take very seriously, and I think he's one of the few. He's like the as Crowley, he also sort of regarded humor as a laughter, the trance of laughter as a sacramentium, and Lavey also. I mean, I was really struck by the fact that he dedicated one of his books to the person who invented the whoopee cushion, and I happen to know there is actually such a thing, and you can Google this, please do. There's such a thing as a satanic whoopee cushion.
Oh wow!
So you've heard it here now. You've heard it here first. That's if I've done nothing else today, I brought that to the world's attention.
There you go. That could be our episode name. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for giving us so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we're going to have you back on soon, I believe, to talk occulture as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
That will be wonderful. Anytime.
And we are back. I knew he was going to be a good interview. I told you. It's refreshingly positive, I think.
Well, it shows he's doing the right thing. I mean, he's obviously doing the right thing. He's on the right path, and he's doing it in the right way, whatever that might be. And so yes, and I think that's actually, I think that speaks for itself, and which I think some other people might benefit from. But
do you feel enlightened somewhat more to the
in a very dark way, in a darkly enlightened way? I must say, I mean, I mean this as a compliment. I've had, I do and have mixed feelings about the figure of Anton Lavey and his legacy, but I think this book actually is the book I've been waiting for quite a long time. That it's a figure of importance. I don't think you can ignore him, and like I say, earlier in when we were talking, we've got that perspective now. It's been a long time since LaVey's passed away, and there's something like we can step back and have a better perspective of that legacy, and and if you look at him, if you try to approach him as a cultural and philosophical sort of figure maybe first, or maybe try to disentangle that, then that does shed quite an interesting take on things, I find. Yeah, so the book, we don't actually mention the full title of the book in the interview. Which like I say, I think it's the book that I think it's actually, I'm going to go so far, it's the definitive text on the subject. That's how I feel about it at the moment. Excellent. Well, it's called Anton Lavey and the Church of Satan, Infernal Wisdom from the Devil's Den. You can get it. It was released by Inner Traditions. It only just came out, actually. It's brand hot off the press, as they say. And we're very kindly sent copies by Inner Traditions. So thanks to them again. But yeah, we'll be back next week with Mark Stavish. We've switched the interviews around for dark and mysterious reasons, but the house of Sitting Now has many mysteries, many mysteries, which some we can divulge. And I mean, like, for example, me and Ken, we danced around the front room to the music, the introduction. But that's just an image I want to leave with you, and one that will be coming to Instagram soon, I'm sure. Yeah, the theme tune of Sitting Now. We leap off our chairs and we dance around the room to it, and that's just one of the many mysteries, which probably should remain a mystery, actually. An inner order secret, as it were. But yeah, okay. So yeah, don't forget, engage with us on social media. Just search for Sitting Now, one word, and you will be able to find us. And we will return next week.
Smerdon.